Good afternoon, or evening, or morning, wherever you may be. Last time we had a virtual Fox Fest, I was the last presenter on the schedule, and I said, boy, I'm really the last session. But now I'm really, really, really the last session. This is as much last session as you can possibly be. So I appreciate everybody coming at this unscheduled time. I apologize for the incident and hope that everyone will enjoy this presentation. It's called What's Up, Doc? Document Management in Visual Fox Pro. And I'm going to take myself out of the picture here. What's up, Doc? Document Management in Visual Fox Pro. Right, now, for some reason, I seem to enjoy picking complex ideas. Today, the idea of document management is really going to be comprised of a SQL Server component and a VFP component. Interestingly enough, document management is a software area that's been around for a very long time. But originally, it was a very specialized application with special monitors, custom monitors, and huge servers and custom drivers. And now it's all scaled down to the fact where we can do it right on the desktop. Now, the rules and regulations of Visual Fox Fest require by law that I tell you why you should listen to me. You've already logged on to listen to me, so it's a little bit after the fact. But the reason you should listen to me is my experience, which goes way, way back. My experience which goes way, way back. And I've been published and I speak, and my company works extensively with Visual Fox Pro and its associated environments, providing custom software as well as vertical market applications. We have 5 items on our agenda for today. Each item has many sub-items, just to keep your attention, of course. Now, with the virtual presentation, we all have to adapt a little bit, myself included, because usually when I have a presentation and it's live in Phoenix, I throw in a lot of jokes, and I see the people laughing at the jokes. So right now in the virtual situation, I have no ability to actually make any jokes. So you can pretend that I made a joke, and you can laugh whenever the spirit moves you. Right. This history of document management that I mentioned was mostly instituted by 2 companies, Fujitsu and Kodak, and they both instituted their own drivers, their own monitors, their own scanners, their own APIs, and it was very difficult to work with. Companies like Lotus Notes tried to store documents, but documents stored in Lotus Notes really, while Lotus Notes could store documents, it really wasn't a great idea. It didn't work that well. It did not work that well, unfortunately. But not now. Now document management is easy to implement, but you first have to understand a couple key concepts in order to be able to really do the document management application that we're going to talk about. So let's start with the issue of storage of large quantities of documents. The first thing we have to know is that we have to deal with storage. Storing documents takes a lot of space and a lot of time of the processor. But we have to store our information somewhere. So whenever I say I can't find some object and suggest it's gone, my wife's response is always, everything has to exist somewhere. It's a law of physics. So our documents have to exist as well. Now, our documents, what's called unstructured data. Unstructured data is simply something that does not have a field that SQL Server can understand. It'll put a document in a big blob field, but it has no understanding of it. It can't search it. It can't index on it. It can't do anything with it. It has no idea what's in that particular field. That's called unstructured data. Unstructured data has always been the most difficult part of dealing with SQL Server because it was never really set up for unstructured data, and they've been adding more and more features as we go. Now, there are 3 ways that we can store our unstructured data in SQL Server. We need to understand the 3 different ways because they each have advantages and disadvantages. Method number 1, the Blob method. The entire document or file is saved inside of the field in SQL Server. So if we look at this picture here, you see that there's a table with fields and the documents are inside of the table. So the actual field where that information is stored in the SQL Server database pages contains in it the file, the blob. If you would see the raw data, you would see field 1, 3, field 2, then you see a field with a big, big blob of data in it. A big blob of binary data. And that's unstructured data, but SQL Server has no idea what's in it. Now, when you put the blob field, the big binary field in SQL Server, you have a 2 GB limit on the size of the file. That should sound familiar. Now, we can easily create an example of the use of blob fields. This is pretty straightforward. The entire document is going to be stored in the designated field. It looks like this. First thing is we're going to create a table, a database, I mean. Then we're going to create a table documents. This table documents has a document ID, which is a primary key, the name of the document, so created on customers and folders, which we'll deal with later. Then the actual document file, the actual PDF or whatever it is, will be stored right here in this document binary max. Simple. Now, when we have this database in this table, we can go into VFP and we can insert a document just like any other SQL operation that we're used to. Right? We create a SQL string. We're going to create the variables that we're going to send to it. Now, one thing to notice is that the document requires a 0x in front of it. That identifies it to SQL Server as a binary blob. So when we convert the string, we convert the file vff.pdf into a string, then we add 0x in front of it, and that's what we send to SQL Server. So LC document is 0x plus the string conversion of this file, and that's what we're going to send to SQL Server. We can get our docs back as well, and we can display them. Sorry, my thing is going crazy here a little bit. Now, to get our document back, we do a SQL select, and then we copy memo document to our file. And then we can display that file. In this example, I've displayed it using the shell execute function, and it'll open the PDF. Now, we're going to see how this works when we get to our PDF, our VFE examples. But this is pretty basic. This is something that you probably could have figured out without coming to the session. The second method is called file stream. Now we're getting fancy. We got to take a look at Microsoft's definition of file stream. Microsoft's definition of file stream is very wordy. But a couple sentences in there really tell us all we need to know. And you could summarize it. It looks like the data is in the same blob field. I have that field called document in the table, and it's a var binary max field. And if I do select, or I do an insert, or I do an update, I get the exact same information I got with method number 1. To me, the user, and to me, the developer, it looks no different. However, file stream, which I believe was created with SQL Server 2008, was the first time, right, actually stores the binary data out of the database and on a hard drive. So in other words, my mouse is going a little crazy here. So in other words, here's our table and all of our fields, and the actual blob that we sent is off on the hard drive somewhere. Now, SQL Server has in the field a coded reference to where that's stored and how to put it back together. But the actual file is off on hard drive storage somewhere. Now, this is a tremendous thing. It gives us a lot of advantages. It's also transparent to the user. Because if we put a lot of blob data into our SQL Server database, it's going to become very, very big. Very, very fast. But this way, the size of the SQL Server table does not increase very much. All the information is stored off in the hard drive, and SQL Server has a pointer to it. When SQL Server is asked to retrieve that data, it uses the pointer to find it. That's called file stream because it streams a file. Now, as VFP people, we're always interested in the history of these kinds of things, at least I am, but it's actually part of a cool project. There was a project many years ago, probably most of you aren't old enough to remember, called WinFS. And it was an attempt to take the NTFS file system and to incorporate a relational database into the actual structure of the file system. Into the actual structure of the file system. So when you would save a document, you're already into the relational database. It's an interesting concept, but it never got very far. However, Microsoft took that technology, added to SQL Server for FileStream. Now, FileStream is transparent to the user, I said, but enabling FileStream is anything but simple. The reason is that it has to be and separately enabled at 3 different levels: the instance level, the database level, and the table level. If any one of those are not properly enabled, your FileStream will not work. To enable it at the instance level, let's take a look. We're going to go over to our SQL Server Management Studio. I'm just working on the, how do I do that here? Let's try this. There we go. All right, we have our database. This is our instance of SQL Server here, MS SQL Server. In order to enable FileStream, we first have to go to this particular instance, and we have to make sure that FileStream is enabled. Now we see here that we don't seem to have any FileStream enabling. How are we supposed to do that? Well, if we go to the properties, there's no tab that says FileStream anywhere. There's no tab whatsoever that says FileStream. We have to actually go into SQL Server config program in order to enable it. Actually go into the SQL Server config program to enable it. Once we enable FileStream by checking off the box in the SQL Server config program, we have to enable it at the database level. And now in order to do that, we have to have a new file group, in order for FileStream to work. So the first thing we have to do is we have to change the database and add a file group called demo documents, and with the keyword containing FileStream. Then we have to add the file to the database to the file group documents1. What we do when we get that is we get the following. You can see here in our database that we have all of a sudden a new file. This is the file we created here. We created that with our alter database command. And in the file groups, we have a new group called FileStream with documents1. Now we did that with those 2 commands there. You cannot use FileStream in the default file and file group. So if I did not create this extra file group called documents1 and create the file called demo documents, I would never be able to enable FileStream. Only 2 commands, but you have to really make sure what name you're putting onto this file system. At the table level, we created a table called SW documents. We have document ID, document name, created on, 2 key fields, 3 key fields, and the actual document itself. That looks suspiciously like what we just did earlier for method number 1, but it's not. there's a requirement whenever you create a table that has file stream in it. You have to have an ID field with the unique identifier, row GUI col. It has to be unique, and it has to have a default of new ID. Now, the interesting bad part about using unique identifier, row GUI col, is that makes the field actually editable. Unlike a primary key auto-incrementing field, which can't be edited, this field could actually be edited in theory. It's a little bit of a security hole, but this field could actually be edited. So we have to have these keywords in there. And then when we define our field, document binary max, we add the word file stream to it. Now, once we've done all that, we can do the exact same thing that we did before. And that is create our binary document, binary information, and send it there. And no one will be the wiser. If you didn't come to this session and I gave you a SQL Server database that was file stream enabled, it told you to go ahead and program with it, you'd never know the difference. If I set it up for you, you'd never know the difference. Because file stream is transparent. That's the biggest thing to remember about file stream. It's transparent. And in fact, you'll see, though, that the files are actually on the hard drive. So what it does is it creates a server ID folder name, then a sub ID, and then this is the file that I just sent there. This is VFF.doc.pdf. Now, what these various pieces of this file mean and how they go together, that's a secret for SQL Server to know. But these comprise the files that SQL Server is storing. And there's a reference to it in the database. This is actually the server's hard drive. Now, file stream does not manage the hard drive, meaning you can fill up your hard drive. You could have problems with the hard drive, and SQL Server won't care. It'll just keep trying to save it for the rest of your life. So SQL Server uses the hard drive, but in no way is willing to manage it. So it adds another layer of management to the database administrator, because now the hard drive has to be managed more closely than it would otherwise. Because the size of the database is one thing, but you could have a very large set of files here. So this is going to improve performance because this data is not inside of the database. But there are pros and cons to all these different methods, and we're going to get to that. But before we do, we need to look at something called file table. Now, this is relatively new. It was only invented in SQL Server 2012. And it's an enhancement to file stream. And it's called file table. Now, file table allows an application to integrate storage and data components to allow non-transactional access. That's Microsoft's definition. In other words, it uses a folder structure with a predefined schema that is accessible to Windows. So instead of having these weird file names here, you would have VFF_doc.pdf right there. Now that seems like a pretty interesting concept, except for the fact that it's not. Because file table stands by itself. It has a special folder structure when you create a file table. And this is the structure. The structure is not change editable. There's nothing you can do about it. These are all the names and attributes of the file. And when SQL Server returns the file into file tables, it has all these attributes with it. So far, it's sounding pretty good. We have the actual file and then all of its file attributes, and the real name of the file is sitting on the hard drive. What could be better? You're thinking he's only saying that because there's a catch to it. And you would be right. In order to enable file table, we have to have file stream enabled, and we have to give it a Windows share to use. So we have to create a share on the server or some other hard drive, and that's where it will store all those documents. Now, I skipped most of these options when we weren't using the file table because they weren't all that relevant. But with file table, you have to have a share for it to save its documents on. Now, once file stream is enabled, all we need to create a file table is create table my files as file table. And we're in business. Now we've had file stream, and on top of it, we have file table that keeps our documents in real form on the hard drive. But, and you can see it even gives you a file explorer to explore the documents. What could be better than that? Well, it's actually an extensive subject how this works, but there's no way that you can use those file table files for anything. Whereas the file table file has a list of all the documents, and that's it. It cannot connect with anything else. So anytime we wanted to save or restore a file, we would have to use the file table, find it in the file table, call it, send it back to SQL Server. It's really, really designed for people who need to access those files via Windows and are willing to give up some of their functionality in SQL Server. It's designed for file management, not database management. There's a lot more information on file table in the white paper. But file table is designed really for file management. If that file management is desperately needed, then you can use it, but you're going to have to interact with this one file table. It's going to have a list of every file that's been saved. And you have to use that. That's the only place you can put your documents. And you're going to have to use that only that table. No matter what you're doing, you can only use that table to save or retrieve documents. Now, let's summarize the three options that we were just talking about. The first option was our blob. And our blob simply allows us to keep the file, the unstructured data, the PDF, whatever we want to call it, the unstructured data, inside of a field in the database, in a table in the database. File stream allows us to have the file stored externally in secret SQL Server format, but externally so it does not have to reside in the actual physical database. Now, what are the pros and cons, you're probably wondering? If this were a live presentation, you would all be shouting right now, hey, what are the pros and cons? Method number one, the basic blob. You can back it up. And when you back it up, your unstructured data is inside the database, so it gets backed up. It can be part of transactions. The data is actually stored in the SQL Server tables field. It can be part of a transaction. And it's the easiest to set up and administer. However, it's a significant factor in slower I/O. There's no access outside of SQL Server. There's a 2 gig file limit, and you can't use it on, I'm sorry, that's this typo right there. File stream cannot be used on SQL Server that's running on Microsoft Cloud is really not the same SQL Server you buy and install. That's something that the Microsoft doesn't advertise, but has a more limited feature set. The features that are offered, and file stream is not offered in Microsoft's cloud. Even though it's been available since 2008, SQL Server 2008, it's not available in Microsoft's cloud. However, the file stream does have some advantages. You have detailed file information. There is a way to access it via Windows, which we'll come back to. SQL Server recognizes changes to files in the share folder. If you change the file via Windows, SQL Server recognizes that, and it's automatically updated. So if I open VFF_doc PDF through Windows and add something to it, SQL Server will understand that. Now, the problem with that is that to do that in file stream is very complicated. High level of complexity. However, file stream with file table, you have detailed file attribute information, and this is easily accessible via Windows because you have the actual VFF_doc sitting right there on the hard drive. And it automatically recognizes changes to any of those files and updates it. It scans those folders and it looks for changes in the file. But a high level of complexity. A typical development environment, a typical developer is going to struggle with file stream with file table. There's no easy connections to the related tables. Now, when somebody says they're about to give you their humble opinion, it may be anything but humble. But for what it's worth, I offer my opinion as follows. I try and use method number 1 to keep my unstructured data inside the database, because I like the ability to back up data with a database. When I do my SQL Server internal backup that's scheduled every X amount of hours, those unstructured data fields get backed up as well. I can also involve those fields in a transaction. I can roll them back, which is very nice. And so I try and use method number 1, where it's just a simple var binary blob field. And I make binary data in VFP and send it, and I read back the binary data and I save it and open it. But if I can't live with the 2 gig limit, then I'll use the file stream for method number 2. Or I cannot achieve reasonable database performance keeping all the unstructured data inside of the table, so I may have to use file stream. However, my experience has generally been that with tuning and archiving, it's possible to continue to use method number 1 and not be too overly affected by the performance. I never use the file table option. Now, the file table option is very, very high on what I call the cool scale. If I was a Microsoft representative demonstrating file table to you, there'd be oohs and ahs all over the audience. But it's too far removed from traditional database management for my tastes. And integrating it into a traditional application is not that easy. Right, now, those storage options, 1, 2, and 3, are very important to us. Are there any questions at this point? Doug, I don't know if you're looking for questions.
No, there are no questions right now.
Okay, great. Now, we have those storage options. We can either use the regular blob var binary method. We can use the file stream method, which looks the same to the user, or we can use the complex file table method, which actually has user readable files stored on the hard drive. Once we've made that decision and we've implemented our SQL Server, we have to turn our attention to creating our basic application in VFP. Now, we all know how to make invoice management applications and customer management applications, and how to add a customer and delete a customer. That's all stuff that we all know how to do. So what we're going to focus on in these VFP forms and examples is the sort of proof of concept of adding document management features into the application. In other words, I'm not going to show you how to add an invoice in. You already know how to do that. I'm going to show you how to add in the document management. In our application, there's various places the user can enter the documents from. We're going to use the Southwest Fox database. We're going to keep it relatively simple to avoid clutter and focus on the documents. We could have all kinds of buttons and all kinds of fancy things going on, but we'll keep it very simple. If you were to build this into a live application, you would obviously need to extend the feature set. So we created a schema in VFP. And the schema involves customers, invoice, documents, and the folders for which those documents are stored in. The logical folders, not the actual SQL Server folders. The schema is not only in the white paper, but there's code in the appendix to recreate this schema and to populate it with several records. Now, Twain, probably most of us are familiar with the idea of Twain. Twain is an API in Windows whose sole purpose is to manage digital imaging objects. Now, the most common digital imaging objects are scanners and cameras. The truth is, if you could write a Twain driver, it could be any kind of digital imaging. I saw a blueprint, an architect's office where I don't know what the person's called, who's in charge of organizing the blueprints and getting them printed out, etc. But they have these special devices, and those special devices are run by Twain. Now, unfortunately, some companies make their own brand-specific API and drivers, but it's a very small minority. Even the people that originally started off with that, Fujitsu and Kodak, all provide Twain drivers for their scanners and their cameras. Twain is designed to be device agnostic. It doesn't care what's hooked up at the other end. Now, it's very difficult to access the Windows Twain API directly. It's complicated, and the documentation on it is not great. So I've downloaded a product called Easy Twain Classic. The reason it's called the Classic, it's the old version that's been released to the public domain. In the white paper, there's a URL where you can get it from. Now, there are Twain drivers you can purchase. Pro version. Some of them do a lot of fancy things. But Easy Twain Classic gives us an ActiveX control that does just about everything that we need. I mean, DLL gives everything. Now I've put comments in the code where appropriate to give you an idea of how to use these Twain commands. Many Twain commands are the same against various drivers. If you want to really learn all the different commands and how to work with Twain, you can have the Easy Twain Classic, but you can review the documentation for the Easy Twain Pro, which lists every single function and how to work it. Those URLs are also in the white paper. So we have to use Twain in order to control our digital devices. And we're going to do that with this DLL called Easy Twain 32, which I downloaded for free. All right, now I made some rules for our application. Boy, a lot of rules there about viewing documents. Number one rule in our application is all scans are converted and saved as a PDF file. No exceptions. Now, if we were designing a web application, you wouldn't even blink at that. That's a standard for web applications. But document management is not the same as image management. If I wish to manage stores and stores of images, I need something different. It may be similar, but a little bit different. Everything that's scanned, even if it would be a simple BMP to display, is converted to PDF. Now, we have a problem, though. What if instead of scanning, the user browses to a folder and adds in their Word document? Now we have a problem. How are we going to display this document? How are we going to know what it is? How are we going to know what it is? So we might want to check the extension, and maybe if it's a Word or an Excel file, we can try and open it in Word or Excel. But that's a little bit hit and miss. The Office Object Viewer to view Office files independently of having Word or Excel installed has been deprecated by Microsoft, making it more complicated. We could open the file with whatever the extension is and hope the user has the program to run it. If the extension is QRB, we don't know what QRB is. We could try test that QRB and see what happens. But we've lost control over the process. So that's a problem when the user is going to put their own documents in there. And we'll see what we're going to do to try and handle that as best as possible. But whenever we can, we're going to save everything as a PDF. We're going to have these following forms. We're going to have a form called SWFox1, which is the top form we're going to have. The user can select customers and see grids. We're going to have one that's a document to list all the documents in the system, a form for adding a document, and a form for selecting the device that a person wants to use when they are adding and editing documents. We're going to have 4 forms. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to pull over VFP. Now we're going to take a look at these various documents that I'm talking about. I'm assuming that worked and everybody could see VFP instead of Now it's a little difficult to fit the whole form in there because in order to run it properly in the presentation, you have to lower your screen resolution to 1260 by 768, and it's a little hard to squish it in, but we'll be able to manage. Let's see if I can get it any bigger. This is the first form. And this form that comes up has on it a few things. The first thing it has a drop down that allows us to select the customer, and it will show the invoices and the documents for the particular customer. Now, they're not necessarily connected. This is a customer wanting to see all their invoices and all their documents. Some documents may be attached to an invoice, some may not. But if the XYZ manufacturing company comes here, they will see all their invoices and all their documents. I've created views so that when we load, okay, I'll go for you to show it there. Okay, well, we have a view for each one of our tables of V folders, V documents, V customers, and V invoices. So our browse here is run off of V invoices. And we're going to filter V invoices based on the customer ID. Now, the truth is filtering is not really the best way to do these things. The best way to do it would be to have a application object. This application object has a property that determines what the current in use customer ID is. And the views would respect that. But for right now, I've used the filter system. And everything here is something that we already know how to do. I gave them a button to be able to edit their users, to edit their customers, sorry. Then I gave them a button that says, open the master documents. And that button opens a form that starts us getting into our document management. And that form is as follows. This is our document master list. Now, only a top-level user could edit an entire list of all the documents, but it's frequently needed. I have many clients who they have supervisors or managers who will look back at 3-4 months worth of documents at a time. And they need to be able to see everything together, which is a frustration when they go on the web. That's a different story. So the first thing is we have a tree view. We're going to populate that tree view. Well, we're going to populate that tree view. I will show you in just a moment. The buttons I'm giving a search button, I'm giving a preview button, a new scan button, and a delete button, and an exit button. Now, tree view, in fact, the definitive paper on how to use a tree view in VFP was written by our own Doug Hennig, and the URL is in the white paper, and I strongly suggest that you look it over if you are not up to date on the tree view. The tree view requires an image list control. The image list control does not, but it's required to be there. And then the tree view uses that list. And here's how we populated our tree view. The first thing we did is we scanned through our folders. Each time we have a folder, we make a top level node for it. And then we scan all of the files that fit that description of living in that particular folder. Then we go to the next folder and put a node in. And then we scan through our documents to see anything that should be in that folder. Now I added a little trick here. And that is, I thought, you know what? There's a few file extensions that we pretty much know. Word, Excel, PDF, you can add as many as you want. And I look at the file extension. And if the file extension meets one of those that we know, I display a different icon in the tree view. And those are based on the icons that were in my image list system. So I have a PDF, I have a blank, I have a Word, I have an Excel, and I have a folder. So when I say display icon number 1, I'm sure we can all guess that's the PDF. Icon number 2. It's not a highly sophisticated system, and it's a little bit cumbersome, and it can be very confusing. But if you download Doug Hennig's paper, you'll never be confused again. All right, let's take a look. Let's run these first two files, first two forms. Second, typing in some password, which I've moved off the screen so that you all can't steal all my SQL Server data. Because I know that you're probably planning that right now. Since I can't hear what you're saying, you're probably having a whole meeting in one of the rooms. Okay. The shoe repair company has one invoice and no documents. The Best Baker Company has these invoices, invoice numbers. Obviously, this is a new company. They only have invoice number 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, and they have these following documents. Now, all this is coming out of the list of V documents. This is coming out of the list of V invoices. We haven't talked how we get something into documents yet. But this is to display it. So a simple view will display this. When we want to use the master document list, now we're getting funky here. Now we have our tree view, And our tree view has put some documents in for us. And it's given it icons for those things that it knows. And for those things that it doesn't know, it just gives it a blank piece of paper because it doesn't know what it is. So this particular file has no extension, so it doesn't know what it is. If I want to view the document, let's add a new one in first. Now we add a new document, we get to our third form, which is very difficult to show in this squished up screen, but we'll work at it together. You're looking at basically the highest level there is here. So we have a document name and a folder, and we want to add a document in. Now we've got a bunch of buttons here that aren't instantly obvious. Scan button, a camera button, a save and cancel button, and undo, an import, convert to invoice button, connect to invoice, connect to customer, and to leave. Now some of these might be pretty obvious, but that's usually so. These two, the scanner and the camera, I mentioned that Twain will drive all those things. These two buttons do the same thing. But users are used to think of as cameras and scanners as two different things. And so therefore, we're obliging them. Let's add a scan, shall we? Now, we have a problem. What device should we use for our scan? Well, we use our Easy Twain DLL to allow us to select the current default Twain. So I have these three scanners. I'm going to select this one. When I press proceed, I don't know how to get it over on the. I cannot get it over on the screen, but right now there's a progress bar showing the scan. It'll only appear on one monitor. It's not movable. Oh, scrubs. That's a big scrubs for me. Well, I'm going to try and cover up the fact that my Visual Foxbird has crashed by making some witty comments as soon as I think of some. And let's go back and try that again. And you just saw one of the things that can go wrong with Twain, which of course is the only reason that I let that happen, because I wanted you to see that. So before we run it again, let's take a look at what we were doing. Goodness gracious. You know what? It rattled me too much. I can't type anymore. Okay. Yes, I've been a developer for many, many years. I actually know how to use my computer. I actually know how to use my computer. Yes, I do. Not really. See what nerves can do to a person? All right. So what we did is we pressed the button here to get a new scan. And we wanted to do this from southwestfox.add. So far, we haven't done anything that isn't irregular VFP. But now we're going to. When we get to the add, now I have a great big image field in the middle of the screen here. And right now it's showing a picture of a blank paper. After we scan, the image that we scanned will appear here, giving a user the chance to either save it or discard it. When I press scan, I have to call the device. Well, and this is what we use to select our Twain device. All we did in this particular button here is use that Easy easy Twain 32, in order to call a function called select image source. The first thing we do is we declare Twain is available, because if there's no Twain driver on the system, or there's no Twain devices, then we really don't want to try and scan anything. It's quite possible that a user could have no Twain devices. If they have Twain devices, we use the function select image source with the handle, and it does the rest. It opens up and it sets the default Twain device to whatever I pick. And that's now the default Twain device for my computer. There's no way to set a default Twain device just for a particular application. It's set for the entire computer. After I've done that, I'm starting to get a little more complicated. Now, here's where the real meat comes in. Scanners and cameras and all those Twain things scan images in a particular format that is unique to scanners. It's unique to Twain. This format does not exist anywhere else. Now, it's a known format. You can get things to work. You can get programs to work with it, but it's not something that you would normally use. And it's not something that most standard desktop applications are going to understand. So what we've got to do is we've got to get that image, and we've got to get it into a proper format for us to save. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hide the scanner interface and make it go away. Now you can set an option for whether the scanner just goes ahead and scans or whether it shows you options first. Here's the deal. It doesn't always work, because all it does is ask Twain to ask the scanner to do that. The scanner has no obligation to do it, and Twain doesn't know whether it did or not. So you could say, oh, no, I want to see all the options before I scan. It could start scanning right away. You could say, I don't want to see all the options. It'll show you all the options anyway. Twain requests something from the scanner. The scanner's under no obligation to listen to Twain, and Twain doesn't know whether it listened or not. There's no return for determining whether or not the application, the scanner, is providing options or not. Right, so we scanned in, and we're going to. Sorry, lost place here. Okay, fine. We're going to acquire to clipboard. We're going to make our scan come into the clipboard. The way we're going to do that is we're going to run a special program that converts scanner format into readable PNG or BMP, whatever kind of files we want. We'll save that in a temporary file. We'll grab it with our PNG. We'll refresh our buttons. And then when we save, that is the binary file that we will institute. This particular picture is the binary file that we will add into our database. Now, there was one problem. I told you that everything's going to be in a PDF. This is when I went to type mounting command. So we have this program that I would like to tell you I created, but I did not. I stole it from somebody. Still is a tough word. All right, now we're going to use our Win API in order to convert things. What we're going to do is, and you can look at the code in the white paper and you can follow how this works. We have calls to kernel to use 32 to GDI+. What we do is there's an OpenClipboard function, and we get the clipboard information. The clipboard information is in scanner format. Let me close the clipboard. Then we're going to output it. And we're going to output it by using these particular functions here. So this create bitmap from H bitmap is what does the heavy lifting here. This involves a lot of it involves some knowledge of GDI, and you're welcome to look into it. There's more about it in the white paper. But what it does, it takes what's on the clipboard that's been scanned, and it creates a standard issue file from it. And there's about 10 different formats that it'll create. I'll put that to a file. What we're doing now is if we want a PNG, you'll see the various things, and then saving the image to the file. Now the image is saved in a file. So we took it from the clipboard. We took it from the clipboard. We created a bitmap out of it. And from that bitmap, we decided what kind of graphic we wanted. And we created it with a GDI save image to file. And now we have our file saved on the drive. Are there any questions about that? About how this works?
No questions.
Terrific. So either everybody understands or I'm incredibly boring. Both are reasonable options. So now once we've done that, we're displaying the particular file that we scanned in. But we haven't done anything with it in the database. It's just sitting here displaying. That's where our cancel button comes in. We just get rid of the image. Goodbye. Oops. I didn't mean to do that much goodbye. Now the save button is a little bit of lifting. The save button makes sure that the file exists. And then we're back to our regular inserting into SQL Server. We're taking the file. So remember, we scanned it in to Twain. Twain gave it to the clipboard. The clipboard put it into bitmap file. Bitmap file is called BMD. We won't get into that. That we have a function that in GDI that changed it from this internal bitmap into a PNG or JPEG or whatever we wanted, and then it outputted it. And now when we save it, we're doing exactly what we did before. Our connect string, insert into our documents, and we're inserting, what are we inserting? 0x plus converting our file. There's some error handling here, and that's it. So we scan it. Once we scan it, we have to put it through the clipboard and through a couple of different iterations until we get it saved as a file. Then when we want to save our document, it takes that file, it inserts it, just doesn't insert into the database, into our table. Cancel gets rid of it. And just erases what's there and starts all over again. Now, I thought that I would add on this master document list the ability for users to specify that this document is related to a certain invoice, because they're not scanning it in on the invoice screen. They're scanning it in on a master document screen. So I thought, well, you know what? That would be a nice thing to do. I haven't really thought, but in a full-fledged application, we would probably do that. We probably would say, oh, they didn't scan it in on the invoice form like they were supposed to. Instead, some supervisor went to the master form and scanned it in. So we wanted to have the ability to connect it back to an invoice. And again, the scanner calls the Twain to select the default, scans to the clipboard, fudges it around as you'll see in the code, saves it to a file. When we save it, we insert that file into the database. Sounds awful simple, right? Okay. I forgot you can't hear. I can't hear you. Then we come back here. We do a requery on our views. We repopulate our tree view. Now, tree view is repopulating the entire tree view. Tree view is bad form. So I have 10 documents in here. It's not a big deal. But when I have 10,000 documents, I'm not going to repopulate the tree view every time. Rather, instead, I'm going to have to find the particular folder node and insert it there. So I just repopulated the entire tree view. Doug is probably wincing at that. But since we only have a few documents here, I populated the entire tree view. We can delete it. And then, of course, it'll be back in our Goodness gracious. It'll be back in our browsers, our grids. Grid, we added. We called Twain to get the default, set the default device. We use the default device to scan or take a picture. We put it into a format on the clipboard. We used some Windows API to get it out of the clipboard and onto a file in a graphic format we like, PNG, GIF, or JPEG, etc. Then, if the user saves it, we insert that into the database. And now we can see here's our database documents. Sorry about that. All right, we don't have a lot of documents in here. So far, I put 3 documents in, doing the procedure I just told you. Now, you notice that the binary data here is displayed. There's a bunch of binary data. You can't do anything with that. It's utterly useless. It's just showing you the first X number of bits of the binary data. I have no idea why it thinks that's helpful, but that's what it does. Any questions at that point?
No questions.
Y'all are so smart. Now, we got a few things we got to deal with other than that procedure that I just told you. That procedure that we just went through is the meat of the user interface. The meat of the storage was one of those 3 options of using SQL Server. The meat for the user interface was using all those Twain drivers and images and conversion processes to orderly scan something in and create it into a file that we can put back into our database. Those are really the 2 biggest pieces of meat in this entire system of creating a document management system. However, we do have a few other things we have to do. We have to manage the database to a certain extent. Now, accessing file stream data via Win32. I breezed through this a little bit, but file stream with file table actually stores the physical PDFs on the drive. File stream by itself stores the documents, stores the blobs, stores the unstructured data on the hard drive, but in secret SQL format. There is an API, SQL Stream API, that allows you to read that data and recreate it back into its original unstructured data file. It can be done. You have to get a bunch of parameters from SQL Server. You have to use a certain API. There are examples of it in the white paper, and if you look in the white paper, you'll see that it's not a simple matter at all. It's not something you'd want to be doing on a regular basis, but it is theoretically possible. And when FileStream first came out, Microsoft touted that ability. They didn't tout exactly how complicated it would be. I recommend you to the white paper to see exactly how complicated it would be. Performance issues. Now, if you're not using FileStream, like I said I wanted to do, and you're just putting the unstructured data directly into the database, it's going to get very big very fast. So if you want to continue to use that, you'll need some sort of an archiving system. And even for using FileStream, keep in mind SQL Server does not provide any disk management. Performance backlog could be at the drive level. Very common because it's not just taking its regular SQL Server pages. It's looking for these documents and recreating them. And you told it what folder to put them in, what share to use. Hopefully you gave it a good one. Backup. If you're using a file stream or file table method, you can't back up your unstructured data as part of the database. It can't be done. Only for using the method where you stuff the entire file into the var binary field, then you can back it up. And you can include it in transactions, like any other field. But if you're using file stream or file stream with file table, you can't back it up through SQL Server. There's simply no way to do it. You can go through all the options SQL Server backup you want, can't be done. And if you're using an external backup system, and it has drivers to back up SQL Server data, it'll never back up that data. So you get great performance. And you can even access it through Windows with some work. But it can't be included in transactions, and it's difficult to back up. On the other hand, if you use just sticking it into the blob right into the field, our method number 1, you're going to have some sort of an archiving system because the database will get too big. One last note, if I may, latest copy of the white paper is available at this particular link here. I believe the latest copy is version 0.9, which I always release 0.9 because you never know when I'll find an error, and I can always say, oh, it was only version 0.9. I'd like to thank you very much. I appreciate especially anybody who took time to come today, which is not a regularly scheduled session. I certainly appreciate that. And I understand that you took your time out of your day, and you do have my thanks for that. If there are any questions, I will take them now.
No questions.
No questions. Comments? Were you listening?
There actually was a comment from Jody. She said back earlier on when you were talking about setting up FileStream, she said, I believe you can change the SQL Server instance to enable FileStream via the server properties page advanced FileStream. That is in the properties on the right. We'd probably have to restart the instance.
She is correct, but you would have to restart, yes, the instance. She is absolutely correct. First of all, I would never argue with her about SQL Server anyway, but she is correct. But it's not the kind of thing your typical developer would really know what to do. I can fake it by setting up a SQL Server database and stuff in some documents. But if I really want to use it properly, I really have to know what I'm doing with this FileStream stuff.
Anyway, that was it for comments. And lots of people saying well done. But other than that, yeah, no other comments or questions.
Okay, let's see. How do I see those comments here?
Choose stage over at the
stage. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Oh, wow. Look what I was looking at. Thank you guys so much for coming. That was very nice of you. Jody, Joel, my gosh. I really appreciate that. Friday afternoon there, coming in. Tracy, thank you. I appreciate your coming. That's it. It's a complicated topic. Hopefully we broke it down into sections that you can digest. You can look over the white paper. The white paper has a lot more details in it, a lot more code samples, and a lot more issues. And if you have any questions about anything in the white paper, you can email me. The email address is on the white paper. And thank you very much. Don't forget to fill out your evaluations.